thank you for joining us today at OSSE. My name is Amy Maestera. I'm the Assistant Superintendent here for Elementary, Secondary, and Specialized Education. And it's a pleasure to spend some time with you today to talk with you about our recent focus group, which we held last Friday, related to the Every Student Succeeds Act, and with a particular focus on special populations. The goal of today's webinar, which will last approximately 1 hour, will be to review the content that we shared at the focus group itself so that people can get an understanding of key decision points and information related to the law, and then also give those who are in attendance a sense of some themes we heard from the in-person focus group so that you can also weigh in and add your thoughts to the conversation as we develop the new state education plan. So with that, I'm going to get started. I should note that you can at any time share a thought or question in the question chat box, and I'm joined here by Dr. Lanisha Adams and Mr. Jonathan Elkin, who will be reviewing questions as they come in and responding. We'll also pause at certain points during the discussion to give you a chance to type in, and we'll look at questions that come in together as we need to. So please feel free to engage in that way, and then we'll also share at the end of the hour some additional ways to give feedback. Thank you. All right, so again, as I noted, today's agenda is really to give you an overview of some opportunities in the Act, particularly focused on special populations, give you a sense of the feedback we received from the in-person focus group so that you can add your thoughts in and just essentially see what was shared to date, and then wrap up with some next steps and additional opportunities. First, we are going to start with an overview, a big picture overview of the opportunity of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So we start by looking at where we are in DC in terms of the education system and the reforms that have been underway and that all of you have been engaged in for the last several years. We know that there are some real system strengths that we're seeing, some improvements and signs of health of the education system, and so two of those are identified here, and we shared those as well with the focus group members. First, more families are choosing public schools in DC, and that's been a consistent trend since 2007. And we see it in both sectors, in both the DC public schools, the traditional neighborhood schools, as well as the charter sector. And then second, we also see that on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP, we're seeing consistent improvement and gains for students. And here you see results related to fourth grade reading, the DC scaled score compared to the national average scaled score, and the same for fourth grade in math. And again, you see that we are accelerating our improvement and seeing results. So again, those are both real system signs of health and improvement in the system. At the same time, we acknowledge and need to acknowledge that we have some work to do. And this next slide gives you an overview of the city's results on the recent PARCC assessment for the past 2 years. So in 2015, that was the first year where we began to administer the new PARCC assessment. And then you see the comparison from 2015 to 2016 here in front of you. And in terms of looking at the data on this slide, first you'll see on the left-hand side that we have the levels from 1 to 5, and PARCC is broken into 5 levels of performance. In DC, the decision was made that levels 4 and 5 would be considered college and career ready, or indicating that a student is college and career ready. So the light green and dark green parts of the bar graph you'll see are representing levels 4 and 5. And so again, you can see that both in ELA and math, we are making progress. We're moving in the right direction. And at the same time, about 75% of students in DC, roughly, are considered not ready for college and career based on the PARCC assessment. So again, progress, but we're not moving quickly enough to make sure that all students are being served. This next slide, and actually the next two slides, drill down a little bit into the PARCC results. So again, giving you kind of another slice of the data. And if you see on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, that's where you can see some of the results related to special populations. And again, the same picture is really reflected here, that we see growth, which is exciting. This is the ELA results slide. But again, the overall performance in terms of students in these populations being college and career ready, you see that we're certainly not where we need to be as a city. And then again, the same data reflected for math results. So as we think about the work of our agency as a state education agency for DC, the superintendent has really set forward for us, laid out two primary goals, kind of the North Star goals for the agency and for the city. The first is that she has framed out that we have a goal of becoming the fastest improving state and city in the nation in terms of student achievement outcomes. And then the second is that we really focus on equity and outcomes, and that's important in DC. We know there are a lot of disparities in terms of results for students in different groups, and so that focus on equity and ensuring particularly that we work to accelerate progress for those who are furthest behind is another critical priority. When you think about those priorities and think about the data that we just saw, they really, the urgency around the work really aligns well with the purpose of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, because ESEA's intent is to ensure that all children, regardless of their starting point, have access to a fair, equal, and significant opportunity for a high-quality education. So as we think about the opportunity of this new law, and it's actually a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which occurred in December of 2015, we pose these critical questions for ourselves internally in terms of our work as the state education agency, and then also to all of you as we think about the opportunity of ESSA for our city. So one is, how do we maximize the opportunities writ large of ESSA to reach our city's goals? The second is related to funding. There are some changes in funding streams under the reauthorization, and so we need to think together about how to creatively take advantage of the opportunity of those flexibilities. And then third, what policy levers exist? How can we accelerate progress and again make sure that all students have access to high quality learning and that we're achieving those results we want to. As part of the reauthorization of ESSA, the Department of Education is requiring that all states submit a new state education plan. And the department has given states the option of turning in this new education plan either in March of 2017 or in July of 2017. osse and the superintendent, along with input from stakeholders, has determined that we need to submit the plan for DC in March in order to be really ready for the school year, the 2017-2018 school year, which is when most of the significant changes in ESSA go into effect. And so this slide outlines the work that we have mapped out at a high level, starting in August, as you can see, and then through to the submission date in March. Just to note here that October, as you're aware, is the month where we are soliciting initial input into the plan and kind of thinking about what we need to consider in terms of the plan. We will then be hunkering down in November and December in terms of drafting the plan, and there will be a second opportunity for input once the plan is drafted and posted in January for a public comment period, during which time we will also be meeting in each of the wards in the city, different wards in the city, along with our colleagues at the State Board of Education to review the core content of the plan. And then in February, we'll be finalizing the plan. The State Board of Education will need to vote on the plan and approve our submission. And that submission, as I noted, will occur in early March. So I'll pause briefly right now just to see if we have any questions about anything that has been shared to this point, and then we'll start diving in a little more deeply into the specific areas of ESSA and special populations. Okay, so we're going to continue and dive in a little more deeply, as I said, to look at ESSA and the intersection with special populations. So this slide gives you a sense of kind of a high-level overview of ESSA in terms of the different special populations that we'll be discussing today. First, overall, ESSA increases the focus on several special populations, either through requiring that states and LEAs provide additional supports for students, or requiring additional reporting regarding the performance of certain groups of students. So there are kind of two components to ESSA that you'll see as we talk through these different populations. One thing to note, and what we noted at the in-person focus group, is that we had a separate focus group for thinking about English learners, which is also a special population. And we did that because there are such significant changes in ESSA, particularly for English learners, that we felt we needed to have a separate time to really think through the impacts. And the content from that session, as well as the follow-up webinar, are available on our OSSE's ESSA webpage. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about these other populations that are listed. So we're going to touch briefly on students who are homeschooled. There's also a new focus on in ESSA on students who are dependent children of active duty military members. And you'll see there that we've noted that there are also reporting requirements that are new for that population. We'll touch on ESSA's changes for private school students. We'll touch on requirements related to homeless students. And again, you see that there are new reporting requirements as well. We'll touch on students with disabilities and what looks different for that population. Students in foster care, where there are also new reporting requirements. And then last, students who are identified as neglected, delinquent, or at risk. So first, a brief touch on two populations that I mentioned. One is students who are homeschooled, essentially just to note that there are no significant changes in ESSA for students who are in this population. In terms of dependent children of active duty military members, these children are now defined as a subgroup. And that means that we will be required to report out on academic achievement for this group of students. But as you can see, that the requirement is solely about reporting. The data is not considered for accountability purposes. So now we're going to dive in a little more deeply to some things that are new. The first category is students who attend private schools in DC. What you'll see on this slide is that the first 3 bullets outline what is already in place in the ESEA and what is not changing with the reauthorization. So first, the state must include private school representatives in our Title I Committee of Practitioners. This is an advisory group that is constituted to help osse in this case think through policies and procedures that impact the K-12 system. Second is that DC public schools must provide services to eligible children attending private elementary and secondary schools. And again, this is a requirement that is already in place because DCPS is considered the geographic LEA. They meet this obligation in DC. And third, services must be delivered after timely and meaningful consultation with private school officials. This is again a current requirement that continues. What's new for students in private schools is that first there is a change in the way the funding is allocated for what's called a proportional share of funds to ensure that private students who are in private schools receive equitable services that are made available under the ESEA and through our state funding. And so the change here is that this amount that needs to be set aside essentially needs to come off the top of the LEA's allocation. And that's a little bit different from what was in place prior. Which was that the LEA could make some decisions up front in terms of how to use their funds, and then there would be particular buckets where in each bucket a proportional share would need to be set aside. So the change here is that the funding needs to come from the entire bucket off the top as a proportional share. Another change is that private school officials can now file a complaint with the State Education Agency, or osse, asserting that the LEA did not engage in meaningful and timely consultation. If and when a complaint is filed, we have 45 days to review the complaint and provide a decision. And the second requirement here is that we need, as an SEA, to appoint an ombudsman who can be a neutral party in reviewing the complaint and helping to reach resolution. And then if there is a circumstance where the SEA, where the private school officials are not comfortable with the decision made, the private school officials can appeal the decision directly with the Department of Education. So the next population which we are going to discuss is students who are experiencing homelessness. So first, again, reviewing what's already in place under ESEA and also reauthorized. One is the emphasis on school stability. The requirement under ESEA and in alignment with the McKinney-Vento Act is that we work to ensure a student's continued education in the school of origin. So if a student becomes homeless and needs to relocate, the law requires that we ensure that that student, if it's in his or her best interest, can continue his or her education at their school of origin. And the one update here is that preschools are now included in the federal law's definition of school of origin. Second, school enrollment. Homeless students are entitled to immediate enrollment, so there should be no barriers for students who are homeless to access education, and that is, again, something that's been in place and continues. And then third, that LEA plans under ESEA must consider the needs of homeless students and incorporate a homeless education plan into the LEA plan. And again, they focus on the child's best interest is front and center. Some new provisions. First, states must ensure that we are disaggregating performance of students who are homeless, and that this is a new subgroup, both related to achievement and high school graduation data. Second, states that receive charter school grants, which DC does, must work to ensure that charter schools' recruitment and enrollment practices do not create any barriers to enrollment for foster youth or homeless youth. Third, every LEA must designate a McKinney-Vento or homeless support liaison. And in addition, ESSA places emphasis on the fact that that individual needs to be able to fulfill his or her obligations under the law. And then fourth, the liaisons must ensure that preschool-age homeless children have access to and receive services. So again, you see that emphasis, you see that threaded throughout the law, emphasis on preschool programs and inclusion in coverage under the law. So I'm going to pause here actually because we just covered two populations, and see again if we have any. Okay, so we're going to keep going. So students with disabilities, again, key provisions that are in place. These are highlighted in the fact that we have to consider strategies in these areas as we develop our new state education plan. First, we need to detail strategies related to the use of alternate academic standards, making those available. Accommodations, making sure that appropriate accommodations are available. Alternate assessments based on those alternate academic standards. Computer adaptive assessments and progress monitoring. And then last, improved school conditions for student learning. We'll drill down a little bit into that. Changes in the law and its emphasis. First, there is a new requirement that alternative assessments cannot be administered to more than 1% of all students in the state. And this is the case in all subject areas. It's worth noting that also in the law, it is clear that a state education agency cannot impose a local cap on participation. However, if an LEA exceeds that 1% cap, there's a requirement that the LEA submits a justification to the state education agency on the need to exceed the cap. OSSE currently is calculating the participation rate in our alternate assessment to look at this issue and to determine if any LEAs currently or most recently exceeded that 1% cap in ELA and in math. And we're doing this to help think through this issue and also help LEAs which exceeded the cap in prior administrations of the assessment think about the reasons for that. There may be very valid reasons based on the population, but it also gives us a chance to kind of think through identification and then administration issues with LEAs and make sure that we're all thinking about this in a way that makes sense, giving appropriate guidance and technical assistance, and helping think forward in terms of this requirement under ESSA. And as you see in that next bullet, this is part of our work to provide appropriate oversight, first looking at the data and then thinking through, again, the decision making and the reasons for why some LEAs may not be able to adhere to that 1% cap. If an LEA determines that they cannot adhere to the 1% cap, this is not explicit in the slide, I noted earlier that they need to submit a justification to the SEA, which we would review, but they also need to then apply directly to the Department of Education if they choose to pursue a waiver for the 1% cap. And then the second big bucket here, which I touched on in the previous slide, is that the state plan must detail how we will work on improving school conditions through reduction in the overuse of discipline practices that remove students from the classroom, and also the use of aversive behavioral interventions that may compromise health and safety. So that's another component that we need to look at and address in the state plan. The next category or special population that we are looking at today is related to students in foster care. So again, we start by noting what is in place currently and what will continue under ESSA. The state, in this case OSSE, must ensure collaboration with DC's Child and Family Services Agency to ensure educational stability of children in foster care. And so you see the requirements that we discussed in terms of homeless students also mirrored here for students in foster care. What's new under ESSA is that states need to identify an individual to serve as the point of contact with the, in our case, with CFSA, and oversee implementation of the new state agency responsibilities under ESSA. And in addition, there's a new reporting requirement. So for students in foster care, beginning in the 2017-2018 school year, states need to begin reporting disaggregated data related to performance. And you can see the three areas here. The first is, again, student achievement. The second is high school graduation rates. And then the third is the percent of students assessed and not assessed on the statewide assessment, in this case PARCC. Additionally, this next slide details one of the key provisions that goes into effect during the 2016-17 school year, and it's right around the corner here. There's a requirement that LEAs establish by December 10th of this year an LEA point of contact for coordination with CFSA, and that LEAs create written procedures for governing transportation for students in foster care to ensure that educational stability is maintained. And ESSA notes that transportation must be cost-effective and should be coordinated between the LEA and CFSA. OSSE is working to support implementation of these requirements You've received some initial guidance through the LEA Look Forward, and we have been working as well closely with CFSA to think through how to best support implementation for LEAs of this requirement. And in the next couple of weeks, you should be seeing guidance coming out that gives additional information and some technical assistance support, some tools for you as the LEA to make sure that you're equipped to implement these requirements fully. I'm going to pause here again and just give you a chance to type in any questions if you have them. So we did get a couple of questions that I know the team is addressing, and I wanted to note as well to add in some comments. Essentially, the questions we received are related to understanding more about the requirements of the LEA plan that was mentioned, and also thinking through how this 1% assessment cap for students with disabilities may, what that will look like in terms of the new accountability system that will be part of our state education plan. So for the second question, we are working through, there's another kind of strand of focus groups and stakeholder engagement activities around specifically around the accountability system design. And that will, of course, be part of the draft state education plan. But if you are interested in learning more or being involved in that part of the work that is underway, you can see the remaining engagement sessions on our ESSA website. We also have 2 surveys that are still open, and we'll, I think, show those at the end of the presentation, but those are available on OSSE's essa website as well. One is related to general input around what's important in terms of considerations for the plan. The second one is related to the different measures for the accountability system. And so it is absolutely a discussion that is underway, and we encourage you to engage in that and to raise questions for us to consider. In terms of the LEA plan, that is another requirement that we will be giving additional guidance on. So stay tuned. Certainly we think it's important to give you clear guidance around how to create that plan, those plans, what elements will be required, and our goal is to really make it a coherent process for you, both from starting with the needs assessment all the way through to the development of the plan. So we will absolutely be providing additional guidance there. Okay, so we're going to touch on the last population, special population that we, where we are seeking input in terms of, again, what we need to be thinking about, how we as a state education agency can support student success, and that is students who are identified as neglected, delinquent, or at risk. And this definition is pertinent to Title 1D of essa, which is the funding stream. But at the same time, we are seeking input generally in terms of thinking about how to support this particular population in DC in terms of meeting the broader goals of the Act and also of the state education plan to ensure that all students are well served and have the opportunity to access a high quality education. So just briefly here, you'll see these are the three kind of core requirements that are laid out for us under Title I-D in ESSA. The purpose is, again, to improve educational services for students in correctional facilities. And again, accessing a rigorous academic program. The second is related to transition. We know that students in this population experience many transitions. They're in many different educational settings. Oftentimes, the transitions happen very quickly. And so this is a real interest and challenge for us to think together about how to make sure that we're serving students well and that they that their education, the progress they're making, gets captured and follows them, and they don't lose time and lose credits. And then the third is related to disengagement. Again, with the issues and challenges facing students in this population, how do we keep students engaged and motivated and on track for success? So ESSA frames out some new areas of emphasis in terms of thinking about the work, and what we shared with the focus group members and also sharing now are some of these areas. I touched on a few of them in terms of the particular challenges that students in this population may experience. So you can take a look at these here. And again, the goal is to really get input and see if you have thoughts or recommendations about what we can be doing better or differently to serve students in this population. Okay, we did get another great question regarding the identification of the LEA point of contact for CFSA and kind of what the mechanics of that are. That will be addressed in the guidance that I mentioned that will be coming out within the next 2 weeks. You will see who the contact is at osse, and then the steps to identify your point of contact. So thank you for raising that question. All right, so I'm going to continue here. It looks like we haven't gotten any additional questions, checking with the team. And now we're going to dive into the feedback that we received. First, just to note that we had about 20 stakeholders, and you can see there a snapshot of who attended. We had a nice diverse group of stakeholders in the room and very rich discussions. So what we did at the focus group session itself is we split into 5 groups and had conversations around, as you can see, these different considerations for specific populations. And each group had a chance to consider some critical questions, and then we shared out to the larger group together to get additional input and reaction. These were the critical questions we shared. So starting with the end in mind, what will success look like for each population? What are our greatest levers for change? And then starting to think more specifically about what osse should be focusing on as we develop a plan that best supports the population. And what should we tackle first? So we're going to start with looking at feedback we received related to private school students. First, we heard that accountability and oversight for the work and for implementation of the requirement are essential. We also heard from stakeholders that osse should be engaged in an evaluation of services, which certainly is connected to that oversight responsibility, to ensure that the services are effective and results-driven. There was a thought that osse should monitor the distribution and timely use of the funds, and that training for the LEA to fully support implementation is important. These are complicated requirements, and so there was an acknowledgement of that. The next feedback was related to the ombudsman role. There was a note about osse having a limited capacity, and some folks felt that it might be a big lift to stand up a new ombudsman and complaint process. There were some thoughts from the group that maybe because the State Board of Education has an office of the student advocate and ombudsman, perhaps this function could sit there. So there was a recommendation to think about that. And then last, there was a recommendation about, or just a reminder, that we should be really clear about this role, and particularly if the title is going to be ombudsman, that we're clear about the function to avoid confusion. Okay, the next is we're going to look at feedback from the group that spoke about homeless students. First, as you can see, there was a real emphasis on the need for strong interagency collaboration. Second, there was a real push for additional funding. There was a discussion about the fact that in order for the homeless liaisons to fully execute their roles, there needed to be dedicated funding to support that work. Third, there was a rich discussion about defining effectiveness. How will we know if we're serving students well, if we're meeting the goals of the plan? And there was a discussion around really thinking about what our baseline data shows and mapping out where we need to go so that we can measure effectiveness. And last, there was discussion about the fact that schools need additional support with training and also ensuring that there's sensitivity to the issues surrounding homelessness. There's discussion about the fact that often when we identify a homeless liaison in a school, the benefit of that is that there's an identified person, but the challenge of that is that we often expect that one staff person is going to ensure that things are communicated and supported school-wide. So how can we help the entire district take a school-wide approach, and what can osse's role be in that? Looking at students with disabilities, some feedback, a lot of discussion about preventing the overuse of exclusionary discipline practices. Again, that emphasis on training. More training is needed. There was a discussion around osse's guidance, which was released, and a request that osse share the guidance more widely. And then a suggestion that osse survey LEAs to learn what models are currently in use for effective behavior support so that we can ensure sharing across LEAs and really disseminate best practice. In terms of the assessments, there's a lot of discussion there, which makes sense. And I'll give you a chance to take a look at that. Again, request for clarity on the process for the waiver, a real emphasis on training, and then an interesting discussion regarding students who may not meet the definition of being eligible for the alternative assessment, either with or without disabilities, but who may need supports in taking the assessment. I'll pause there for a moment and give folks a chance to chime in on any of those feedback themes or add thoughts. Okay, we do not have any additional comments, so we're going to keep going, be mindful of time. Students in foster care. So there was a lot of discussion around credit transfer policies and the graduation requirements, as you can see. And this really was highlighted by the group. It's something that osse has actually started to look at and think about in terms of what steps we could take to facilitate the exchange of records between schools and also the review of transcripts, how we can help those students who are moving between LEAs and between LEAs and other settings get credit for courses taken and make sure they don't lose ground due to mobility. And then discussion about transportation as a barrier, and really a push for us to think through how we can support at osse and how DC's agencies can support transportation so that the burden isn't on students and families. You'll see similar themes in terms of neglected, delinquent, and at-risk students. So again, a focus on partnerships. How can we leverage the partnerships we already have in place to better support coordination? And then this issue of credit-bearing opportunities. And some ideas about, particularly for students who are incarcerated, how can we use different types of learning program models to help them continue their learning? And a note around celebrating success, which is an important comment. So that gives you a sense of both what we shared and the feedback we received. In terms of next steps, we ask that you send any feedback on the webinar or generally your thoughts on essa to the email address that you see there. I also mentioned the 2 surveys that are still available. We encourage you to take 5 minutes to, well, this says 20 to 30, so I guess I should revise that. 20 to 30 for the measure survey, which is the survey I discussed related to the accountability system. And then there's a second survey that's more broad and really touching on that question of what makes a successful school. And that was created with the Board of Education. You can access both of those on our website. So I'll pause for a moment and see if you have any final questions or comments before we close out our time together. Okay, so we haven't received any additional comments, so we're going to go ahead and end the session. Thank you again for participating, sharing your time with us today, and please do feel free to follow up. If something comes to mind, you can contact us directly or through these other avenues that we've reviewed. Thank you again, and have a good evening.